Welcome to Catholic Homeschool Radio, where we begin conversations to help parents enrich their lives and make practical decisions for the future.
Welcome to Catholic Homeschool Radio. Priscilla McCaffrey here, speaking from my old parish in St. Louis. More specifically, St. Michael's Parish in Shrewsbury, Missouri, right outside the city limits. My guest is Father Kevin Schroeder, who is the current pastor. Several of my siblings are still in St. Louis. I have two sisters who live in the same town that I grew up in. One who is the mother of 8. My sister Felicity is the mayor of Shrewsbury. And she did run uncontested in the second election, and I think they like her. She compares it to her own little Mayberry. Welcome, Father.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning, and thanks for spending a little time with us. Of course, it's very interesting to me that Father is a very young priest, and he's the oldest of 14. This is not actually a new St. Louis kind of story. This used to happen, though 14 is that was a lot even in my day, but it's extraordinary now. So bless your parents.
Yeah, certainly.
Yeah. How old is the youngest one?
My youngest sister just finished her freshman year at St. Louis University.
And
so I guess, what is that, 19? She'll be 19, I think, in 2 weeks.
oh wow! So what are your parents doing?
Yeah. There's always someone at home, you know.
I guess so. How many married in the family?
7.
Wow. And then the grandkids must be mounting up.
Yeah, I think there's 23 of them, so it's
Oh, my gosh.
always a busy time during the holidays
Oh,
and
good.
birthdays, things like that.
Yeah, then you must love that, and they must love to have you around. I guess you also must love to see them and leave them too. Go back to your own quiet. I'm a new grandmother right now for the first time, and that's delightful to have that baby come in. The baby comes in with my daughter, and we say hello to her politely, and then grab the baby, and he's very well loved. I'd like to talk to you about the memories I have of St. Michael Parish, but we won't really get into that. They're pretty typical memories, but suffice it to say that, like most Catholics, I love my old parish. I love the look and the smells of the parish when I walk into it. It brings me back to my childhood, and I think that is that's an important thing to a Catholic, to have continuity where you're brought back to the innocence of your childhood, mm-hmm. because I remember those days too, and I love the church itself, the building. I remember leaning against it, and it was very cool in the shade on the hot summer days when we would play up in the playground, and we even we worked in the sanctuary with the Sisters of Notre Dame, and we sometimes pulled the bells for the Angelus, so we considered ourselves pretty lucky. And I am very grateful, of course, that another man now walks in the footsteps of so many parish priests before you, so thank you, Father.
Mm-hmm, certainly.
Now, I want to talk to you about vocations, and before I ask you about your own vocation, which I love those stories, can you explain the difference between a vocation and a career?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, ideally they would sort of blend together, but I think in our world today, a career, I would explain it more as sort of the business side of things. You know, the career is what I do to make money or to provide for my family, and that's good and noble and important, but it doesn't fulfill every aspect of who I am, whereas a vocation really takes into being everything that God gave me, my personality, my gifts, my talents, and it doesn't just worry about making ends meet or making money and taking care of my family, as important as that is. It's about bringing holiness to my heart and my life, to my family, and to the world as a whole.
So it's not a 9 to 5 job.
Yeah, exactly.
Does that collar ever get
It does when I go to the gym. Yeah, it's sort of uncomfortable to work out in. But
yeah, Nike doesn't provide
not
for
yet.
that.
We're a small market. But even for our lay people, the more that we as priests teach about vocation, it's so important because there's this great divide in the world now of like, I'm Catholic, but I don't want to impose my thoughts or my beliefs on other people. And if we have a good understanding of vocation, of course we're being respectful of other people and treating them with kindness and patience and respect, but never backing down from our call to proclaim the gospel and to help, in a spirit of charity, help other people when we feel like they might be doing things or believing things that are harmful to them or other people.
Well, we've had priest friends who will say, of course they wear their collar because in the airports when they're traveling, because that's when so many people are on the edge and and so willing and ready to talk to a priest. They somehow think it's just something that they should do then and there. And then we have no other priests who say, oh, I don't want to be bothered. When with my time off, I'm on vacation or I'm traveling, and I think we're all so grateful to see the priests in there, so that we recognize who they are when they're walking through. Then, all right. So you did something actually different. Also, not too many young men have gone through a minor seminary. There are hardly any minor seminaries anymore, and you were in one of the last ones that did close after you left. Were they waiting for you?
They were waiting for me, yeah. No, 2002.
Then they closed the door.
Yeah. 2002 it closed, kind of in the midst or from the fallout of the priest abuse scandal, which, affected a lot of seminaries and Catholic institutions. But yeah, I was so grateful for the experience that gave me and seeing God's hand in passing on discipline and training and virtue. Many of those things my parents had sown the seed, but then having those things really come alive in that environment at such an important age.
Okay, so let's trace back a little bit to find out how you, as a teenager, could determine to leave your family for those early years. So, all right, you're the eldest of 14. Now, my brother who was the only boy with 9 sisters. And people say, well, the men usually say that poor boy, and the women say, was he spoiled? But he got out and he went into the Marines, and which seemed a safe refuge, get away from the hairspray. So you probably weren't just seeking refuge. So let's.
Yeah, well, I do have 10 sisters, so
you have 10?
I have 10 sisters.
Oh my gosh!
So I think in the back of my mind, priesthood would at least give me a room and possibility of hot water, which I never had growing up. But no, first of all, my parents, I remember them telling me when they brought me home, I'm the oldest, and they started looking at me, realizing we have to take care of this kid, and not just make sure he has food and a clean diaper, but more importantly, we have to get this child to heaven. And they were kind of frightened because there's no manual, and they realized maybe all the things they didn't know. And
were they Catholics themselves?
They're both from
Catholic.
big families, big families here in St. Louis. But I think
they're pretty much my generation.
Yeah, they're in their mid-50s.
Okay.
Yeah, what I admired about my parents was really their humility. That they were very ready to accept there are a lot of things we don't know and ways we have to grow in our faith and just as people to raise our children and to be good people. So I think that sort of mindset of theirs I always appreciated. Even from as a kid, I always felt like I could go to my parents and ask them, why is this happening? Or why are we doing this? And they weren't defensive about it. They were always willing to talk about it.
So when did your parents start homeschooling? Was that from the get-go?
I was in St. Lawrence, a Martyr school for kindergarten and just a brief time in first grade. And then they felt like it would be a better fit for them to try their hand at teaching us. So
yes.
My mom did that, and it had to be tough. My mom
Absolute.
did high school, and that was it. And there was no manual for how to, at one point she was teaching 10 different grades every day.
Yeah.
And
not sleeping.
Yeah.
And being
right.
pregnant.
Yeah. And what was good too, though, didn't know it at the time, but the older kids were brought in to help with the younger kids as far as, we might help them with their reading or check their homework. And so even at a young age, getting taught how to teach and how to be patient and to guide people, your younger siblings, all great things for the priesthood for sure.
Yes. And also what was good and what I have found with my family is that when they're homeschooled and then they realize this is not the normal thing, then they ask questions. Well, why do we do this? And they're not usually challenging the parents. Sometimes by a certain age, they like it pretty much because it can be a pretty relaxed atmosphere. But they begin to understand that their parents have made these decisions and that maybe their parents are on top of things and maybe their parents think about other things too. And the parents aren't looking for the government, public school system to tell them what to do when with their children. So there is an interesting relationship between the homeschooled child and his parents. And I would say also that works for the traditionalist family that generally goes out of their way for Mass. The child realizes, oh, my parents think about this a lot. And and then they ask questions, then they develop a little apologetic. And that's a little bit different from just going the normal path. So you were homeschooled, and what program did you use? Was there one at the time?
Yeah, for the beginning was Seton, and then my mom kind of tailored her own as she kind of got more comfortable and saw maybe needs that each of us had. And I also, my parents too were, going back to that humility, they recognized that each of my siblings and each of their children were different. So some of us were homeschooled into high school, some of us were homeschooled to a certain point, and then mom and dad realized, hey, this school, whether it was private or parochial, would be a better fit. So each of my siblings, we all had a slightly different educational experience based on where we were or what my parents thought was best.
Yeah, I'm totally for that. I'm not. I think homeschooling is wonderful, but we did a mix of that too. My son pretty much had no formal schooling. One daughter went to a private high school. It was a mix for the third one, and again, that's where the child realizes the parents are really thinking about them, and helping them to along in their lives, and that it varies with each one. So I'm going to have to do a podcast with your mom sometime. What is she doing now? Is she retired, or is she going to get a degree or something? And
she's
they often do that.
A para for a special school here in town that really helps children with learning disabilities and mental disabilities. So she does great work there, and she likes to say that we helped her. If she can teach us, she can teach anybody. So we're happy to have helped her in that way.
Well, you had to introduce her to a variety of experience. Right. And also when you're a homeschooling mom, you do at some point think there's something wrong with this child. and you do think you don't really know what normal is.
My parents said that after spending so much time with us, they understood why animals eat their young.
Oh, well, yeah, that's kind of crazy. Was your mom trained in any way for homeschooling?
No, just she finished high school at Kennedy, and then they dove right in. We liked when my dad taught because he was a pushover, and we knew that he would give us the easy A if we begged him. But mom was a little tougher.
Good for her. All right. So then, did your parents kind of sense that you were interested in the priesthood, or was this since this happened fairly early in your life?
Yeah, it wasn't one single thing. Part of it was since we were homeschooled, the parish priest knew he could call us and say, "Hey, I've got a funeral. Can you guys come up?" My brothers and I.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, it worked
Yeah.
out perfectly.
A little
So we
commission
did that
on the side.
Yeah,
it
it
never
did.
hurts.
Yeah, and we almost burned the church down once because we forgot the Easter candle.
Oh, no.
But he forgave us, and we got to serve more.
Yeah.
So we had that going for us. My brothers and I were three of us are all close in age. So it's me, then one of my sisters, then two brothers. And actually, when I was maybe 6 or 7, opened up my own church in the neighborhood. We used my parents' garden shed.
Oh,
and,
you did. Were you hearing confessions as well?
Well, I don't remember hearing confessions, probably because no one wanted to come to me. But we did have we played mass. We had mass and used tennis rackets as pattens. And,
in the old days.
Yeah, in the old days, and there were miracles that I was able to work. It was pretty spectacular.
Yeah.
So we went out to the neighborhood and tried. I mean, so as kids do, you imitate what you see at mass, but then also my mom kind of smiles because we used to go out and try to get the neighborhood kids to wear the scapular and pray the rosary. And
were they Catholic kids?
No, not all of them.
Yeah.
But it was those little things where
you found nothing weird about that. It was just
it was just kind of like, hey, why not?
Yeah.
So those were kind of the seeds of the vocation there. Serving at mass, of course, is important, and we had good priests. I mean, one was a little bit grumpy and crusty, but he was kind, and the other actually was an unusual case, Father Lockwood, who was a Protestant minister and knew my parents from the pro-life movement, and then became Catholic and was able to be ordained a priest. So
was he a married priest?
He was, yeah.
Okay.
And actually, so I, knew his daughter, one of his daughters, and all of that. So it was just good priest and kind to us as a family and to me, which set that thought in my head.
Oh, that's beautiful, because you had to look at him and say, why isn't it good enough for him to just come into the church? Why does he want to serve God in this way?
Sure.
And it takes some humility, and it's very difficult. I think that's a really tough thing for those men to do.
Sure.
We have the pastor who has this magnificent traditional mass. It's in a regular parish. He's a married priest, Father Chipola. Wonderful wife, but I don't think it's easy.
Sure.
In many ways. He has to be on call to the church really 24/7. It's really tough, but still I look at him and I think he could have just had a nice life. He could have become a Catholic and been continued to be a professor because he had his own career. But he chose something very difficult. And was that pretty much, was he able to kind of explain to you the Bible basis, scripture basis for the priesthood, or?
Not really. His was, and I would say a lot of the most influential priests for me were actually their example, that you see behind maybe their hard work or whatever they were doing in their parochial ministry, that sense of peace and joy. Because I think no one wants to go into a job or a career or vocation, however you define it, where you're going to run ragged or where you feel like you're going to be stressed out all the time. That's not what draws men to the priesthood. I think what drew me and draws all men is that idea of serving others, having a greater purpose in your life, but also deep down knowing this is what will bring me joy. This is what will fulfill me. Because after a great, as a teenager, I wanted to get married. I wanted to be like my parents. I wanted to be a carpenter, and I would love to do that. I still, at the parish, I do woodworking and things like that. But there was something more, that God called me to, and I'm grateful for that as well.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to bring in this other story about you that my sister told me about, and I was so happy with. But now that I understand you have the inclinations of a carpenter, you went into St. Michael's, and I guess you noticed there wasn't a communion rail. Did you notice that? Did your eye think there should be a communion rail here?
Yeah. What happened was when I came to St. Michael, since it's a small neighborhood and it's such a close-knit parish, I started going door to door, just knocking on the parishioners' doors, just saying, "I'm your new priest. I just want to say hello." And
Did you give them the scapular to wear?
yeah, exactly. It goes back to my roots. And over the course of my visits, people would say, "Hey, come on in, and let me tell you a little bit about St. Michael," or my family donated this. So I got to a great history and a sense of the community here just by visiting and talking to people. And that was one thing that came up, like, did you know that Felicity Buckley has one of the gates of the communion rail? And okay, well, who has the rest? Well, Tony Wagner has a whole bunch of it over at his storage yard. So from that, I sort of learned that there was a communion rail, that it was in pieces all over Shrewsbury, and also that there was interest in it being returned and restored.
Yeah. Alas, I remember the day before it was taken out, and one of the priests announced at the daily mass that it would no longer be there, and they had not made an announcement to the parish because they didn't want to be divisive. So it went. And that was about 33 years ago, something like that.
Okay.
Because it was when around 30 years ago. And just to fill in, even before you came to the parish, my sister reported to me that the head of the town dump said, "Felicity, I have something to show you." And he took her down to one of the sheds, and there was a major part of the communion rail. He said, I can't throw it out. And this is, a couple of decades have passed. He can't get rid of it. He said, "I made my first communion there. We made our first communion there because he was in her class at St. Michael's." And I don't even think he's attending a parish at this point, but at this time, but he understood that there was something sacred to it. And God bless him. I think that's so wonderful that he held on to it. He held on to the major part. And then Felicity was sad about that. He was sad about that, and she thought, well, there's nothing they could do about it, but maybe she would take part of it for whatever reason. I know she had some idea, but then stored it herself. And then, so you came around.
Yeah, after I'd been here a couple of years and kind of got a sense of who had what, and also, you with something like that, you don't want to present it as a divisive, that you're not making a statement or trying to divide your parish. So it took me a little while to feel like, all right, we're ready to do this.
Restoration is a good word.
It is a good word.
Right?
Yeah. Well, and God, what I've learned in my short time as pastor is let God lead you, because there's a lot of times where I have an idea that this would be great, or this is what this parish needs, and sometimes that's right, but oftentimes I have to find out, is that my idea or God's?
Yeah.
And what happened was a parishioner passed away and said, "I'd like," basically one of their last wishes was to restore the communion rail, and they left.
Can you tell me after the podcast who that was? Or
I don't know. Yeah,
is that a secret?
Yeah, sort of confidential. But
okay.
What was beautiful about it was at a time where certainly the parish couldn't have afforded it. But it made that possible. And then things started falling into place. One of my old parishioners from St. Charles has a business that essentially cuts parts out of metal for factories and things like that. And I said, I don't even know where to start. And he had the equipment in 3D modeling to cut the little couplers and the spindles on the rails that were missing.
Okay.
Otherwise, those would have been hand forged and they wouldn't have matched.
Yeah.
So like these sort of things started falling in place. And then he knew someone that could sandblast the whole rail, even though it had been sitting outside and rusted terribly. Brought it back to, it looks brand new.
So it's all sandblasted. It's not painted.
Well, it's sandblasted, and then
is there a coating
then it's
on it?
Coating, a black paint coating.
I was a little distracted when I went up to the communion rail the other day, but you weren't there as a little child going up to that communion rail day after day with this, with We had the School Sisters of Notre Dame here, and we always went to Mass every day at 8 o'clock. And I know the altar boys loved flipping the linen over the rail.
Yeah.
Just these little things. But, Newman, Cardinal Newman has a homily on prayers that we all know or actions that we all do, and why that's a good thing. And he gives several reasons. It connects the generations. And another reason he gives is when you go back to it as an adult, it reminds you of that earlier time. And that's a good thing, to see the continuity in your own life, that God has brought you to this place. All right, so how old were you when you went to the boarding seminary?
Sure, I knew for sure God wanted me to be a priest during a retreat towards the end of my freshman year in high school. And then I came home and told Mom and Dad.
Was that you were homeschooled still?
Yeah, I was,
okay.
yeah. And there were a lot of extenuating circumstances. My mom, earlier that spring or winter, late that winter, had almost passed away giving birth to child number 13.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
And so while she was in the hospital for nearly a month recovering, my dad would be with her to encourage her and just to support her and be with her. So my sister and I spent a lot of time taking care of our younger siblings. So that was the first sort of moment where God is, I felt, preparing the way to take care of other people, to think of people other than myself. And then on a way to a retreat in Indiana with a group of high school buddies, there was an accident right in front of us, and 2 men in 2 separate cars passed away.
Oh my gosh.
On the highway there, and the priest in the car with us went out and anointed them and called their families and said I was with them before they died.
And what consolation.
These priestly moments. And during that retreat then, hearing God in my heart say, feed my sheep, knowing without a doubt, to feed his sheep as a priest. Coming back to Mom and Dad and saying, I need to be a priest. And they were like, that's great. Call the vocation director. And they were very supportive. And he said, hey,
This was in 2000.
This was in 1997.
Okay.
And he said, hey, it'll be great in 3 years. You can come to the college seminary and it'll be wonderful. And I said, I want to be a priest now. And credit to him, it was unusual, but he looked around and found this seminary, high school seminary in Hannibal, Missouri. It was a boarding school. And once again, my parents, it was very hard. They just lost a baby. And then to essentially lose your oldest child, going away, they were very supportive and let me do that and supported me in every way. So then I went kind of.
So at age
discerned,
15,
yeah.
By then you were.
Yeah.
Okay. And who ran that seminary, that minor
the Diocese
seminary?
of Jefferson City.
Were they Vincentian priests
No,
teaching
just,
or diocesan?
The majority of them were just the diocesan priests there. A few Franciscan brothers, but those were just 2 of them.
And then so that was, and then they closed it in
2002.
Okay. And then you came to Cardinal Glennon?
Yeah, came to Shrewsbury and was here for 8 years studying college and theology, and then was ordained and went to the cathedral as the master of ceremonies for 2 years, and then associate pastor at St. Joseph in Cotteville for 4, and then back here in Shrewsbury for 3 as pastor.
I know, of course, vocation, it's a beautiful word. It's a calling. I think too many young people think a calling is akin to getting a text message from God. I want you to be a priest. I want you to be a sister. And so I think perfectly suitable young people who don't know how to discern a calling because they are looking for that big message, a big feeling. Yours was, in some ways, it sounds like a painless path. Not a lot of angst about the vocation. And so I wonder if you have some advice on that kind of thing. what is a young person to expect who thinks, like the other boys in the car with you, they probably were moved by the action of the priest in those last moments, and probably thinking, yes, if I were dying, I'd want a priest there, or I'd like to be that to someone else.
Sure.
So what should they be waiting for, or should they begin the process if they feel there's a possibility?
It's sort of two parts to the answer. One is there are things that we have to do, each of us, because even after, in my case, discerning a call to the priesthood, that's just one portion of the discernment has to continue daily. I still have to discern even today, how does God want me to be a priest right now, and how does that all work? So I think having that mindset, we have to have the mindset of this is not a one-time deal, like I got to get this right or I miss out, because God is constantly calling us, and we have to be in that habit of listening constantly, daily, always. What I tell young people, and I'm amazed, even here in Shrewsbury, this is a small parish, there are so many young kids here when they serve Mass for me, when I see them in school, when we're out on the playground, when I teach them in class, and I'm thinking, I'll bet you I would not be surprised if he should at least think about the seminary if he's not called outright to be a priest.
But is it perhaps necessary for someone to put that suggestion?
Sure.
To them?
Yeah,
I've
announced
like
it at
you,
Mass
for instance.
Yeah. So I think that's the two parts. One is people need to listen, but the other part is they need the opportunity to see happy priests who love what they do, who love the people they serve. And that also allows people to listen, because no one wants to go into a calling where you're stressed out or you feel like you're unhappy or you're torn a million different ways. That everyone wants to be happy, and for people to know God's going to call me to what will make me truly joyful, which will use the gifts that I have, both the big picture gifts but also the little ones. I get to do more, I feel like more things with the gifts that I've had ever since I was a little kid as a priest than I probably would have if I would have been a carpenter.
I'm sure that's true. We also have a priest friend who says you do get your calling the day of you get the sacrament. So, in other words, God will supply. When you have said yes to the sacrament, even if you're thinking the whole time, I haven't gotten any big sign here. When you receive the sacrament, you're called.
Yeah.
And you can rely on the graces of the sacrament, and it's the same thing for marriage too.
Sure.
And as you say, that is something that has to be visited all the time. Marriage isn't about, as Father Scheidler said the other day, it's not just about that one day. It's about the rest of your life. Well, Father, thank you so much for spending this time with me.
Certainly.
I think I would love for a lot of people to meet you face to face, but this is a start, and I appreciate it very much.
Happy to do it.